this, like, oh, don't call me an immigration advocate. I'm an immigration control advocate.
Yeah, I'll change it when I get it done. I just
when David put that title, I'm like, okay, we're gonna have a hostile guest.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hey, everybody, this is the Land of Confusion show. I'm David March. This is the show where we interview interesting people, and I've been in all sorts of things in my life. Paul?
Hello, everyone. Once again, I'm Paul O'Brien, curious individual and appraiser out of Houston. Always happy to talk to interesting people like our guest today. Julie, care to introduce yourself?
I'm Julie Axlerod. I'm the Director of Litigation at the Center for Immigration Studies, which is the nation's only think tank dedicated to researching the effects of immigration, the costs of immigration on our nation, and our, how it costs us to have the immigration system we have. So.
All right, Julie, since you are a think tank, can you think in one word the current situation?
Chaos.
Good word. All right. Have a good night, everyone. So obviously it's been a lot that's been unfolding the last couple of weeks. What got you into law initially?
Oh, well, I was just one of those students who was good at better at writing and literature than and math and science, and I was like, well, what do you do to make a living? And I was actually a classics major in college, and I remember one of my professors tried to convince me that I should get a PhD and teach Latin in college, and I was like, I don't actually think this is something you can make a living at easily. There's there's way more supply of PhD students than need. So I thought, well, what's something people will pay you for? And I was interested in policy, and I kind of thought someday I'd work my way to that. And so I went to law school, and then I did actually work my way to policy. So there you go. Lucky me.
That's cool. So of all the individual niches that you could have gone into as a lawyer, what attracted you to immigration specifically?
So I'm a native Californian, and it's not the same place it was when I was born, when I grew up there, and before I was born. It's just the immigration really changed the state of California for the worse. And not to say that it's about individual immigrants not being good people. It's never been about that. The left has always been really great at framing it like, well, either you don't support any border control at all, or you hate immigrants. Like, I know everyone's met lots of immigrants they like, right? That's not the point. It's not sustainable. What it does to the middle class in your society is just terrible. Like, you don't have a middle class society and open borders. So I saw what was happening, and I also saw how they got beaten. I mean, we had a nice Republican governor, Pete Wilson, when I was very young. But we had this great Republican governor, and he had really good intentions on immigration, and the state passed, and it was not a racial thing. Like, everyone supported it. The state passed a proposition that said no benefits for illegal aliens, right? And it was very broadly supported. Again, there was nothing racial about it at all, right, at the time or ever. And the courts just overturned it. It was gone. And then there was a Democratic governor next, and he's just like, I'm not going to defend this. So it was just gone. And there was no democracy in that. It was like the state was giving all these benefits to illegal aliens. People didn't want it anymore. They were crying out for help, and nothing they wanted to happen happened. So it just, it affected me. And I also saw it coming for the United States. Like, it was like California, it happens first in California and then it happens in the rest of the country. I mean, that's always been the case. California's always been like the first to get non-fat milk, the first to get no smoking in restaurants, right? Like, all kinds of things. Lots of them are good. But with open borders out of control and the people having no say, that was not a good thing that came for California first. So I, I was doing corporate law and I just wanted to do something more meaningful. And so I made my way to DC, and haven't been effective in anything apparently, because here we are and things are worse than ever, sadly.
Well, it's definitely an uphill battle when it comes to immigration. Where do you feel most of the resistance is felt to any sort of policy change when you're trying to make it? Would you say it's more on the individuals on the grounds, the middle, the middle power brokers, or the people at the very top?
I mean, it's elite versus people thing, issue, just like many other issues are. I mean, you really have a consensus among Republicans and Democrats who make the rules that, more. I was reading something. More is good and less is racist, right? Is there? I think it was Roy Teixeira quoted that recently. I was reading some Substack, and it's good. It really sums it up. And they're like, yeah, just more, because the Chamber of Commerce loves immigration. I mean, they like lowering wages. They like it when employers get to have compliant employees. They like also just constantly growing cities, because it's easier to expand your business when you have more and more customers. So it's like, it doesn't mean that the average person's life is getting better. It's not. It's just that it's easy to make money if you're already on the top.
Yeah.
With constantly expanding labor and constantly expanding consumer bases. So, I knew it was bad, and the groups that really should have stood against it are the environmental groups and the labor unions, and they both just fell down on the job. So,
well, labor unions also are kind of had the unfortunate problem of being like undermined by the very existence of this immigration problem, and basically being destroyed, like drastically reduced in size and effectiveness. So it used to be the labor unions were one of the people who was most against this stuff.
I mean, that was in the 1920s. The labor unions really led the fight, and that, again, like, people make it into a lot of things, but the labor unions didn't want their own members' wages to be constantly undercut. And you really do need an organization to stand up for the people. Like, people can't really stand up on an individual basis. You need somebody to organize it. And I think the labor unions, they just kind of made a deal with the Democrats, which is, the Democrats are pro more voters that people they think will vote for them. More voters and more labor union heads, but it didn't ever work for the actual member. And again, the environmental movement, kind of the same thing. The environmental movement was actually pretty strongly against, like, out of control, unsustainable growth through immigration in the 60s and 70s and even 80s. And then they also merged with the Democrats. So I like to think of Teddy Roosevelt as like the first populist who created our national parks. And he said, immigration has to be in the national interest and people need to assimilate. And that's the way it is. And, it was the three. Yeah, in those days that worked. And in these days, I think they're just too much. they're too much in bed with the Democratic Party, which has other interests.
So, in your opinion, this, I mean, before I say this, but this can't continue. There is a breaking point where things start to fall apart and sides begin to change. Uh, I think this is something that is evident on the border with Texas and the way Latino voters are swinging over to Trump in droves. And I think you could see the same in Arizona and even California. What do you think is what is in your opinion, what do you think that breaking point looks like? Because we can stay the course, but there's a point in time where the swing is going to go the other way and it's going to go the other way very hard. What do you think is going to be the exasperating factor for most folks?
I mean, I don't know. And I honestly kind of think, I'm not sure if I really believe in the backlash theory, because like the backlash theory only works when people are allowed to have their way. I mean, Trump was that, and they were, you know, they created COVID, and they created, well, we're not going to have elections the way we usually have them. And, I think that, I don't know what happens after that. I mean, they sort of, I think they've responded to the moment by cracking down on political dissent. So it looks like this, I mean,
Well, right. And that my more where I'm thinking is like, as Greg Abbott makes the immigration problem our problem as a country by busing them to the Northeast, the Midwest, and everyone's calling crises over 20,000 immigrants, which is funny to say in general because millions across the border, and
Right.
they cry foul over 20,000. What do you think what do you think is the resolution, or how do Democratic parties that are not on the border rationalize this to the locals of who are having these new splurge of immigrants? Like, what is the pitch? How do you twist this for the people who this is not normal for?
you mean if I were on the other side, how would I pitch
Yeah.
it?
Well,
Um,
because you're on the ground, you see them real time. Like, it goes from tolerable to intolerable. What's the spin usually look like?
I mean, I think it looks like, but Trump is such a racist. That's what it
Okay.
looks like. Because I mean, you will find that many people will change their mind about immigration when they see like the effect it has on their kids' schools.
Right.
Like all kinds of things. Like I mean, it's been fascinating to watch the Chicago meetings where people are super angry, and I think these are Democratic voters who are screaming and saying, well, why are you doing this to us? Now, I mean, I think they probably voted for the people who were encouraging it.
Yep.
I don't, I think they need to stop voting for the people who encouraged it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you've been told all your life that the Republicans are just evil and you can't vote for them, you know, I don't know. I don't know when you change your mind. I mean, I do see on an individual basis, I see people changing their mind. I mean, again, I think, you know, I think elections are not as they're not run in the same way they were. I mean, if you're collecting a ballot, I guess the person who collects it gets to look at it and make sure you voted the right way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I do know, people are not happy with it, and you're seeing that all over. And but the choice they've made so far is just to more stridently attack the Republicans as evil and Trump is evil, right? I mean, that has been your choice. Like, well, you just, you don't have any choice, because what are you going to do? Vote for Hitler?
Right.
Eventually, what happens is they do vote for Hitler.
Mhm.
Germany in the 30s showed that. It was like,
Yeah,
What are
that
you
is
gonna
the
do?
we
worst.
are going to vote for him.
What are you gonna do? Vote for Hitler? Actually,
Yeah, if he can't
yeah,
deliver on this stuff, yeah.
right. Well,
And
so
I
let
mean,
me.
I don't think there's anything good there once that, I don't think when the government chooses to double down on propaganda instead of addressing the people's concerns, that leads to anywhere good. I
Right.
don't.
No, that's totally in agreement with that. When it comes to your line of work and what you see on the front line, can you kind of tell us in the audience something that you see on the front line that other people don't, that really just gets under your skin? Can you kind of give us some example of what you see on the front line of what you do?
I mean, so I'm not really necessarily the front line, but I talk to people who are, and the most upsetting thing I've ever seen is the child trafficking.
Okay.
I really, that one, that just really, and that's not necessarily the front line of what I do with litigation, but like my plaintiffs, they have seen it directly. And the awful thing about it is, I think the Democrats have this open borders agenda. They want, they just want to bring everybody in, but I don't I don't think they need to also take away the mechanisms that make sure that, really evil things aren't being done under the cover. So like they used to have this, they had this DNA testing program, and they, like, if a person was there with a baby, they would say, all right, we're going to test you and make sure you're that kid's parent. And a lot of people will just abandon the kid, will just go, like, that's it, they're out. I mean, so one of my plaintiffs, he actually, his sister fostered and then adopted a baby that was found at the border. And they were with this newborn, was found with these adults who said were their parents, and they're like, well, we're going to test your DNA, and that was it. They left the baby and ran away. So the way it worked is like they would use the threat of DNA testing, like, to their advantage. They would see who was suspicious. They would interview people, and the fact is they dismantled that. So they could still have open borders, but make sure there isn't child trafficking going on.
Right. So
But they don't. So that's what just really bothered me. Now it's not the only issue. It's not the biggest effect. It's certainly not most of what's happening, but it's what upsets me the most.
okay. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, the child trafficking thing. It's always like it's always presented as child trafficking has happened. What I really haven't understood is the angle. Like, what is the angle for child trafficking? Simply, oh, like families get treated better than single military age males, so I'm going to go grab the nearest kid, say I'm his father, and then come across the border? Is it sexual exploitation? Is it? I've never understood I've never really gotten a clear picture of what the angle of the child trafficking is when it comes to illegal immigration.
Well, so I'd say most of it is people, like, bringing their own kids because, like, people get through easier with a kid. It's just that once you have a lot of people with kids coming through, people who are trafficking those kids can come through too.
Correct. So it's an
So
incentive, because we are lenient with people with kids. We've now incentivized people to basically take kids to get
yeah.
an easier time through the system.
And if you're going to have a lot of kids coming, you can traffic some of them.
Right. It's if they got 4 kids, you just need to snatch up one of them.
Well, like, I mean, people sell their kids, and like, the
Wow.
kids are. I mean, so, like, and I'm not saying these are most of the kids.
Sure.
I'm not. I'm saying some of the kids are not being brought by their parents, are not being reunited with families, are being trafficked.
Right.
Like, and that is what's happening.
Mhm.
And like, we don't pay any attention to what's happening because it's basically the honor system. So like, you've probably heard the 85,000 kids that were lost by HHS. Okay, so like that number is basically HHS gave a child out to someone who came to take them and they never even called back. Those
Mhm.
are people who never even picked up the phone when they
Right.
were followed up with. They just dropped out. So where is that kid? And why didn't they pick up the phone? Right? But that's only like the people who didn't pick up the phone. It's not. I mean, maybe the phone call you used, maybe that when you called up someone who still was up to no good, picked up the phone. So I'm saying that's kind of a minimum of kids who just someone took them and we don't know why, and we don't think that they were their parent because why didn't they pick up the follow-up call from HHS? And this is what I mean, is like they could even still have a lot of people coming, which would be bad, but fix some of the loopholes, but they choose not to. And so
Right.
that's what really gets me. Like, even though it all gets me and it all upsets me, but it really upsets me that people don't seem to care that they're enabling like the worst thing in the world,
Right.
which is of the abuse of children.
What do you think their motivation is? Is just are they just evil? Are they just
I mean,
corrupt?
they get money for it.
Right. Well, no,
I mean,
that's
like
it's the justification. It's sort of,
No, no,
if you interviewed them, I could see how that interview goes. The mother who sold her child away.
oh no,
She
no,
doesn't-
I don't mean them. I thought more for meant the officials who could close this down but are choosing not to.
Oh,
I mean that I mean that like that has been a question in my mind, like, do they know what they're doing? But that's what I was like I just don't, I can't see how, if they choose to end something like the DNA program, which was very effective in catching child traffickers, I can't see them choosing to shut it down without knowing what they're doing. That's what I mean. That's what really gets me.
I
Because
could
there's a lot of people that they just believe in open borders. They think everyone should come, and they think they're doing the right thing by having everyone in the world come. There's just a right held by all people, all 7.5 billion people in the world really have the right to live here, and we should go get them if they can't afford to come. I mean, it's not sustainable. We don't have space for 7.5 billion people in our country. Our country's not the only good place to live in the whole world, and I don't think so. Even though I love our country, but they do believe that almost in a religious way. So, those people, though, I don't necessarily think they are doing evil consciously. But what about the people who are ending the DNA program? Like, I don't know. I mean, I can't see into their
I could
heart, but
I think I could rationalize it. No, because the thing is, if okay, so if, yes, the DNA program successfully catches child traffickers, but then you end up with an abundance of children without parents. Because now that we know that this child doesn't have this parent, now
oh,
we
they
have a
have
child
that
without a
anyway. They
parent.
want that.
Mhm.
So,
Well, maybe that's the good follow up to David's question. They want that. The DHS wants to have like an abundance of children without.
I mean, they do have a lot of facilities for them. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not,
Well, that's
I mean, that is what I mean. So it kind of goes back to the 2008 law, which was the William Wilberforce anti-trafficking law, which made it much easier to traffic children into this country, because that was like the original law that said when you have a kid with you, you're treated differently, right? So it was like that law, which they said was to prevent trafficking, made it easier to traffic children. So it's like, I don't know. I don't think you can really say that a law isn't intended to do what it does.
mhm. Well, no, I mean, I could definitely see how, first off, I think the root of all this is just a general reluctance to just equally enforce the law as intended to everybody equally. There is this crowd that's listened to, which is like, oh, but like, what about the women and the children? We can't just force them all out. You could force the men out, but what are you gonna do that to little kids and women? And it's just, it starts to me that I've always found that to be the first toe in the door is, well, what about this exception? What about this exception? And I see the repealing of the DNA test to be again an affirmation of the unwillingness to just treat every
But
illegal immigrant equally.
that doesn't send them back. That doesn't send the kid back. That just intimidates a person who does have a kid that they're trafficking. That's
Yeah.
what that does.
No, I agree. I'm
They
just
can still
I'm
be let
pondering.
out, but like it helps you catch the ones who are really up to the worst thing.
Mhm.
By the way, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, so it's good that we're talking about it.
Great.
All right, we are aware.
Yeah, so I mean I don't think so. I don't think when it comes to programs within these programs that allow people to come in, the ones that are aimed at figuring out what you're doing. Like, yes, I think if you open up the border and you lose control and you cede control, a lot of bad things are going to come in with it, and no matter what you do, that is true, and the only way to have less is to control the borders. But I also think you can't necessarily justify the level that they don't care, that they don't care about having any checks for poor behavior. So,
Right.
we'll see. I mean, I
Well,
don't
it's
know what they're really thinking. I don't know what they think.
right, and the thing
I
is,
can only guess.
I mean, what I find over here in Houston, Harris County, this is something that just really was dawning on me when it comes to our law and order over here. The biggest problem with these, hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants that come through is even the ones who are breaking the law. We simply don't have enough prison space to jail the potential lawbreakers coming in on top of the ones that we already got in town. There needs to be a mass, raising of new prisons to, properly, punish the newest lawbreakers on top. And sometimes it's it's jailing the gang members that they get, but then releasing the domestic disputes, the aggravated assaults in exchange, simply because we don't have enough room in the prisons.
I mean, we don't have any of the infrastructure that's needed for these floodgates. Like it's prisons, it's schools, it's roads, it's water supply. So I mean, you just can't do it. So there's a certain, so like if you have natural population growth as in people having kids, it grows in a different way because rural people have more kids. It's not just like a bunch of adults flooding the system at once. I mean, it's a significant strain on everything to have this happen.
Right. Yep. No, no disagreement on our end. So, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in California with over, let's say, last 10 years with the immigration in where you live in San Diego? I thought.
Oh, no, I've lived in DC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I live in DC. I was saying, like, the reason why I thought immigration was important was because, like, California natives tend to see it. So that's when I came here to try to save the rest of the nation from our fate in California. Again, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I tried.
So, okay, let me rephrase. So in DC, DC really doesn't feel any of the immigration stuff, do they?
No, I mean it does. There's definitely a lot of effects of people in DC. I mean, it's just that in DC there's so much wealth that's created by the government that I don't think we feel. I don't feel like we feel anything quite in the same way. Now, I live in Northern Virginia, and again, it's a nice area. Like you have all the government workers. We don't feel recessions the way other people do, but we do feel the population growth. Like, I mean, so the suburbs of Virginia just they get more and more congested all the time, and like the traffic gets crazy, and yeah, we definitely feel the effects I talk about here.
Have they been busing people into DC yet, or is that more just New York and Chicago?
I don't know. I think we have people anyway.
Mhm.
I mean, and also, I mean, I don't like they're making a mess out of DC like right now, and that has nothing to do with immigration. They're just making a mess out of it. Um, so I
I
like it's
remember my
like it,
time in DC, and I got stuck on this one traffic circle endlessly near the
like
Virginia border.
it feels like more on edge in DC than it did a few years ago. I mean, I think it's the crime,
Mhm.
like the fact that they're not enforcing the law, the
Sure.
regular criminal laws.
So what's a current piece of policy that you're actively lobbying for at the moment?
Oh, I mean, well, I work at a think tank and I do our litigation, but I personally do like the House bill. It's a pretty good bill. The
Okay.
Senate bill is not a good bill,
Oh, really?
but I'm not a lobbyist, so not
Well,
now. So
the
yeah.
term I've always used is just like, what are you like rooting for or like pushing in DC? That's sort of my reason for the phrasing. Um, can you give us sort of an idea of how the typical conversation goes when you're trying to push these policies with let's say opposition?
Well, I mean, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to ask that for because I
Okay,
I'm
can you
unclear.
give us sort of maybe I should backtrack a bit. Can you give us a step-by-step timeline of how policy goes from the think tank to Capitol Hill and then where you are in that step process?
So okay, so what we do is we uncover the data
Okay.
in the Center for Immigration Studies. So we uncover what's going on, and hopefully, people will make policy based on better information. So it's not like a step by step thing. It's more like, you know, if you reveal what's actually happening and tell the public and policymakers about it, like more informed decisions will be made. And like
Right.
to some extent they are. I mean, like for instance, it was one of my colleagues who just because I don't know if you remember when Obama was saying like I've done more deportations than anyone else has, which was actually a lie. He just changed the definition of deportation. So like it was like my colleague who figured that out by analyzing the data. So what I do
So,
is
just briefly,
sue when they
what did
can't
he
get the
do?
data without suing. What?
What was the definition? I hate to interrupt. I just was curious about the definition change.
Oh, so basically, like pre-Obama, a deportation was if they sent you back from inside the country, but not if they turned you back at the border. So then they were like, let's just call people who are turned back at the border deportations. And then we can say, we've had more deportations than anybody else. Now, if you have an apples to apples comparison, you've done less.
Okay, thanks.
But, like you've decided to call something that people didn't call before a deportation. I mean, the ironic thing is, like, at the time, we did kind of change the conversation by revealing that. But then as time goes on, people just remember the MSM like, oh, yeah, lots of deportations. And now people like, remember how Obama was so tough on the border? I'm like, look, he was not nearly as bad as Biden. Biden's just miles ahead of. We've never done anything like this. This is just crazy. But Obama was a real break from what we'd ever done before. Like he was bad, and he was not the deporter in chief.
Mhm.
It's just like the level wasn't bad. I mean, look, I would love to have Jay Johnson back instead of Mayorkas. I mean,
Mhm.
Mhm.
but I didn't think it was good at the time.
Well, we
Right.
can always do what Eisenhower did.
So to kind of take it down back to the South,
Mhm.
what is your interpretation of what's going on with the back and forth between the Supreme Court and Greg Abbott? Can you kind of give us a little bit of your opinion on that, or your reaction when you saw the statement from the Supreme Court and then Greg Abbott's rebuttal?
I mean, yeah, I think they made the wrong decision. And of course they didn't explain it. I mean it's like a preliminary injunction that they vacated, right? So it's all very, it's all very preliminary and thus not reasoned. They're certainly signaling that they believe the federal government has a right not to enforce the law, apparently. They're signaling that, but what, you can't really attack their reasoning when there isn't any. It was just a statement. This is what they're doing. And I think Greg Abbott is doing the right thing by saying, I have the right to protect Texas. Like, I mean, look, this kind of goes way, way, way back when people joined the union. They weren't saying, oh, we're going to join and you are going to force me to be, subject to an invasion, like we're going to join and we're going to give up our rights to protect against foreign invasion. Right. Now what the legal definition of an invasion is, I mean, that's another question, but just the concept, I think, is that they wouldn't have joined if they thought they were giving up their sovereignty.
Correct. No, that's very deeply philosophical and honestly true, once you bring in the context of it. And it's really just a federal power press to say, we don't care. Dem's our new interpretation, not rules. Because the rules are there. And like you said, like for some reason we pass laws and then choose not to follow them. Kind of makes the whole passing laws bit kind of redundant if you just choose when you want to follow them. Just
right. I mean,
why
if
even have them?
you go back to the Constitution, it's Congress, not the executive branch, that has uniform power over naturalization. Mm-hmm. That's Congress. That's not the president to just say, well, I'm going to let anyone come in who I want. I mean, and the truth is, the president does have the power to repel anyone he wants. Congress has given him that. Congress has given the president the right to say, like as Trump did with the what they called the Muslim ban, but which wasn't a Muslim ban, the travel ban. A president can say, like, we think because of the national interest, X class of foreign nationals can't come in anymore. And that could be all people if they wanted. They could say, I mean, like with COVID, people aren't coming in. The president really has been given the power by Congress to stop people from coming in at any time. He doesn't have to let anyone in. On the other hand, Congress has said straightforwardly, it's required to have operational control over the border. In the Secure Fence Act, so we're not really dealing in a world where Congress hasn't spoken. Congress has spoken. And it's Congress that has preemption power in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So that's why I'm saying I think they're wrong. We'll have to see how they end up justifying it. But I think it goes back to a case in 2012 during the Obama years where Arizona actually passed a law. You may remember this, where it was mirroring the federal law, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do it. It's preempted. I disagreed with it at the time. Scalia wrote a great dissent on that at the time, and I think we'll see what happens. But I don't think you can allow I don't think you can allow an executive branch that's out of control and won't do its job to just force an invasion on the country. I don't think you can do that.
Sure. When it comes to the individual Supreme Court members, so two people come to mind, Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett. Why do you think they fell the way they fell? Because in my recollection, they tend to, like, specifically Barrett up to this point has been pretty good on immigration as far as like rulings go. And I think also I think Roberts actually does a decent job of ruling on immigration. Why do you think they fell this way with this injunction specifically?
I mean, again, I don't know what what their internal
Well, best
issues
guess.
were. I don't, I mean, when it comes to immigration too, I wouldn't say the Supreme Court has been positive.
Yeah.
With the MPP case, Texas versus Biden, there was also a case on that said the states don't have standing to challenge enforcement priorities because like, oh, they don't have an interest because it's not appropriate to get involved in enforcement decisions. Now, I just don't think saying they don't have standing is the right way to go about that. Because standing means you haven't been affected. So to say a state hasn't been affected by the enforcement decisions is really a very different thing than saying
It's very condescending and frankly cruel. Like,
it didn't make any sense. And again, like if you wanted to say, I feel like if they wanted to say, we're just going to bow out of this one because we're not going to get involved in enforcement decisions. Okay, maybe fine. But they said there's no standing, and it didn't it wasn't a good opinion, and only Alito was good on that. So,
well, it's just, there's no, it's like I said, it's cruel. It's almost like you haven't suffered enough for us to care about it. It's just,
well, look at who these people are. These are people who are very elite, people who are not being affected by this stuff. And
yeah, I mean, if I were going to move any branch of government somewhere, I wouldn't move all of Article 2, but I would actually move the Supreme Court to the border and have them live there and have their clerks live there, and that's where they should live.
Right. It's just, no, exactly. I mean, it's no, it's cowardly because my thing is, this is one of those escalation things, because once I think there is an escalation of militia gathering where the sheriffs begin they already have started deputizing citizenry to directly go and defend themselves. There is that escalation, and then it just takes a matter of federal agents versus militia, not even Texas Guard, and then once shots start getting fired, I wonder if the Supreme Court's going to grow a backbone and say, hey, maybe we should play a part
I don't know.
de-escalating this.
I don't know if you heard about this case, but there was this I think it was a rancher in, I think it was Arizona, where he shot a fire which seemed to be self-defense, and someone died, and he was indicted for murder. And it was, they couldn't even prove that the person who was found on his property was shot by him. He could have been shot by somebody else. And so I think there's actually a real movement afoot to punish people for not just being militia, not just being proactive defending, but actually just carrying out self-defense. So I think there's this, there's
welcome
this
to Canada.
It's so corrupt that Americans are being punished for completely lawful actions. So yeah, it's a really, really bad idea to be doing this. And the people on the border are they've had it. They don't trust anything anymore. How could they? And I just, again, I think they're just too disconnected from it. And they just if you live in DC, you read the New York Times, you read the Washington Post, your social circle has really different thoughts about what's happening. They just don't see it. They just don't see what's happening. And it's really irresponsible not to see what's happening. It's really irresponsible to punish people for defending themselves. It's really responsible to make people deal with an invasion like that. And I don't know what I'm saying, where I think it's going. It's not going anywhere good. This is not good. But I also do think we are going to feel the effects of having these maybe 10 million or so people all over the place. We don't know who they're from, where they're from. Lots of them could be criminals. They could be all kinds of bad actors. Obviously, not all of them are, but there could be many of them who are, and we are going to feel that, and it's just so irresponsible to do it, and it's really distressing that we've gotten to this point where we have so lost control of our government that it's doing this to us.
Right. I again second everything you said. And the thing that I feel that they're discounting is the amount of folks who refuse to take this way of life as normal. They will never accept it as normal, and there will be a growing number of people who are willing to pick up a gun and say, not only is this worth dying over, this is worth killing over.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think that's why they've done so much to intimidate people out of protesting, honestly.
Right. And I think
they've been doing a lot to make people afraid to protest. And I like if you suppress dissent and you suppress people's right to say what's happening is bad. I mean, like, you don't even know what they're really thinking.
Right.
It could be a lot worse than you think it is.
One of our watchers has commented in here, and he said, Brian Stevens, who previously answered, John Derbyshire used to say that if ideas are suppressed from legitimate sources, people will turn to illegitimate ones. That's certainly a problem.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I don't like. I've been calling for better policies for a long time, but we're all going to be, suffering for the fact that our government really refused to listen. I mean, and I think Trump was. It is really amazing how little the political class absorbed what Donald Trump's election meant.
Yeah, they continue to think, especially when you hear like folks like Destiny on Twitter speak out or speak in debate, they still think this is like teams. Like Donald Trump is Republican, Republicans like each other. Like they don't understand there's a lot of nuance, and that Trump is a break from the norm. That was Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, and all these other folks. Like that was the norm. Donald Trump, and they're reaffirming that they, are putting a middle finger up through Donald Trump, and they want substantial change. It is very frustrating to watch disconnect, to think that it's just team games. If Donald Trump wins, then Republicans are content. And it's like, no, there's a uncooperative class underneath Trump that is actively working against him. We're not all on the same team.
Yeah, and the media tells people like, oh, you had it all your way when Trump was in power. And like, of course, we're like, we know that there was this big resistance against Trump. We know that. We know, like, his term was stolen from, his first term was stolen from us. It was right. Like his second term was stolen from us. I mean, that's how people feel. Yeah. And, you like, oh, well, if we beat him this time, all those people were going to go away. Although I'm actually kind of afraid they have internalized that. And that's what, Biden, like getting up on stage with this like blood red and black, background saying like, basically it's all your fault for having opinions. I don't know, for wanting us to take care of your needs. I mean, it kind of has shifted from like Trump to half the country.
Yeah, that is something I did. I have occasionally still listen to National Review online podcasts. And when I was listening a few weeks ago, and there was this guy, and he just believed that somehow if Trump goes away, all this stuff that's happening goes away. And it's like, no, he's just the focus point. These people, everyone down there is really mad. Like, you need to deal with this. And of course, he's a guy who lives in Washington, D.C., works for a think tank.
And Trump, Trump went into politics because there was an unmet need.
Yeah.
I think he was attracted by politics. Like, people kind of forget how much he was thinking about running in 2000. And I think, he thought, I mean, I don't remember this at the time, but I'm just saying, like, going back, I've looked at that again, and he's just like, maybe I should run the Reform Party, because all these things were already there, right?
Yeah.
They just hadn't reached ahead the way they have now. and trade policy, like immigration is one aspect. It's the one I've specialized in, but I've always believed in the trade and foreign wars aspect too. Like, so it's I just didn't choose to make that my job. So, but that doesn't mean I've never understood that it was three planks of the America First movement, right? So, like, he was talking about it then, and he was thinking about politics, and I think he realized the Republican Party wasn't ready for him, and maybe he wanted to have a second act that was more fun than a political one. But like, then 16 years later, we were still looking for that, and like, that's the political class made sure that no one else could rise up to meet the need. It filtered everything out. Like, so when I was I remember in 2015 I read this article. This is, I think, January, and it was sort of like, oh, the field is set now. Like, the field is set, and the big donors in the GOP have decided that, like, unlike Romney, we're not going to have any of this primary battles with people who don't support comprehensive immigration reform. And what they meant by that was amnesty plus, like, lots more legal immigration. So, like, they were sort of bragging about how they made sure there weren't going to be any candidates this time in the field in 2016 that offered that. Like, we're sealing it off. And I was just like, I don't know. I guess the field is set. And I'm kind of like, maybe Cruz would, maybe Scott Walker would, but it doesn't really look like they will. So, like, I think we need someone outside the system. And I was like, well, maybe like a billionaire with a knack for getting public attention could come outside the system and, like, be the one to do this. So
the thing is, he was exactly, but that's just it though. What he described was very different. It was very different, and that's what people want. Different, completely indistinguishable from what was the norm at the time. And before Trump, Variety was thought of Ted Cruz, Rubio, Jeb Bush, Ben Carson's, and that was called Variety.
Yeah.
Well, the system prevented any real difference from rising up. Like, the system just prevented it, like, and so, like, that's just not going to work forever.
Correct. It won't. But I think this is something good to bring up, and a good topic for us to roll into. The Nikki Haley tape that was recently dropped earlier this week. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to it.
No, which one? The
bombshell, the one that made the Arizona Republican.
Oh, the Kari Lake tape.
Yeah, the
Kari Lake tape.
Okay, yeah.
Did I not
Kari Lake tape would have been something much different.
I know. I'm like, I don't want to hear it.
What did I say? What did I say?
Nikki Haley has a whole.
Oh Lord, I apologize. Kari Lake.
It's like, I don't want to hear secret Nikki Haley tape.
Sorry about that.
I don't want to hear that.
No, Kari Lake tape. Apologize.
Yeah.
Have you heard the Kari Lake tape recently?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. One of the comments that the Arizona chair said was, "Look, Kari, this is about where they spoke about the donor class, and this is something I bring up in book club quite a bit. That your view in the RNC, your value to the RNC is not how electable you are; it's how much money you can raise. And if you could raise a lot of money, you're deemed electable." And Kari correctly pointed out, this is all about consultants getting their bankroll. This has nothing to do with electability or what's good for the country. It's, can this consultant class get retained for another term? And Kari correctly identifies this. And again, it's something I bring up in book club. It's if these consultants are, feel like they get a payoff you, they will convince you, much like they did Ron DeSantis, that you can win if you could raise so much money. And what did Ron do a year ago? He raised millions to go on this suicide run and successfully committed suicide. And the thing is, everybody got paid, coffers got cleaned, and now we're going in. Basically, this primary is over, but all this money has been spent for no reason at all. And
I mean, if you disliked Ron DeSantis, which like is not me, I didn't like. I guess you accomplished tarnishing him. That's pretty much it.
Well, that's just it, though. Who is the winner with the DeSantis campaign? And the fact is, they raised a lot of money from a lot of donors, and then everybody burned it. And it was the same thing after the 2020 election with Trump and all those lawyers who are just scalping everybody for donations and funds to help fight the good fight against X person or X organization. Here, donate here if you want to help Trump win. And then people just got robbed blindly in legal fees that were on BS cases that never meant anything. And this does play a role in the choosing of the elected representatives, which is again where the disconnect goes. I think there is an entire political class that is, and I know there is a political machine that actively looks for people to just secure donor money just to keep themselves in the game, not to the candidate winning the election is sort of a secondary thought. It's how much money can we raise for the fight.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you really see this everywhere. Like you see like nonprofits who like, it's like, do they want to cure cancer? I mean, like, well, like, how would we make our living if we cured cancer? Like you see this like all over the place where it's like people are just there to make a living, and it's not really about the ultimate goal. And like the left suffers from it too. It's just that they have so much money. they can afford to lose more than we can.
Yeah, they have it for now. We'll see after this recession how it all shakes out. But
yeah, no, we will. But because I remember it first kind of struck me that this actually happens to both sides when I was like sitting in DC at a restaurant, and like I just happened to hear this woman telling her friends at the table like about her plan. I think they were pushing another DREAM Act, and she was like, yeah, we're gonna like we're telling these kids stories, and we're having this produced video about how great it was to get DACA, and we're gonna shop it to the Republican senators. And I was like they don't, like, they know if they've heard that already, like they don't, and they're not gonna, like, this isn't gonna change their mind. Like, are you just like, because they put so much money into that fight, like they put so many billions, and it was just like they just threw it at some groups who were like, this is great, we're gonna produce our videos and we're gonna do that. And I don't know that they were really getting anywhere with it.
Correct. and that's, yes, that is, or I'm a bit more cynical, but truly, you have a lot of money going to organizations with a good headliner and a dream, and then it's spent with people who quite literally have no idea what they're doing or how to make it effective. Yeah,
I mean, it happens. Like, I mean, it's really distressing, and I don't know what the real solution is. I mean, I think part of it though is also that like people spending money they didn't earn, and that isn't gonna, if they spend it wrong, isn't gonna affect them. I think that's the problem. I think people just they always seem to need a reality check by, like, because if you work for a private company and you're doing your job and you're not creating money, I mean, you'll get canned. Like,
yeah.
And I just, it doesn't really work that way with so many causes, and because you can always say, well, like, okay, so I said I was going to fight the election and I tried and that didn't work. But like, if you get to say like you don't expect results, I mean, you're just, if you have a situation where nobody expects results, you're going to waste a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, here in Canada, you know how lobbying works in Canada?
No.
There's a lobby outside of Queen's Park or Ottawa, the Parliament Hill, and the lobbyists go into a lottery, and they get to set up trade tables like they're at a trade show, and MPs and people and senators walking by, they hawk their wares.
They what?
hawk their wares. They're like, my friend goes to the one in Toronto all the time. He's like, they'll have like the trade beer people will have their night and they'll be giving out free beer.
Mm.
So we have like our lobbying is much smaller. Of course, the stakes in Canada are a lot lower than in the United States. But I do remember reading a book by David K. Johnson years ago, and he's talking about he was in an airport in DC, and someone said, I just came to Washington. I'm here to get my money, because at the time this was 2008. $250,000 was being spent by the U.S. federal government every second.
Wow.
Yeah, and now it's way more now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, because if you think about the number of representatives compared to the population when this country was founded, I mean, it's just like there's so many more. Like each person represents so many more people. Like, of course we can't hold them accountable. Like there's just no way. People are too busy to follow politics at that level. So, I mean, I think the solution is more, don't centralize so much in one place that can get to be so disconnected.
No, you are. That's definitely a that's the beginnings of a theory that I also tend to agree. What was the apportionment before they locked it in at 435? What was the apportionment? One senator or one congressman per how many?
Yeah, I mean, I looked it up, but I've forgotten. But I mean, it was much bigger. It was
like a five
Yeah.
figure number. Every 5-figure number, there's another representative. And the more I think about it, the more I like the idea of just having like 30,000 congressmen.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the truth is, it's much harder to lobby 30,000 people
Right.
versus 435. It's actually much more efficient to sway one way or the other. And we want the federal government to be, you can't help but think if the government were more inefficient, we wouldn't be where we are today. In the way it goes about spending.
Well, and like it's funny. So their staff does everything. Their staff also really just gets told what to do and what to say by lobbyists, right? And then they have the administrative state do all the details, right? So it's just like, yeah, if we had like a Congress with 30,000 people, like, we could actually like elect some real experts in specific things.
For randos. I mean, I've always found it weird that we don't have more Congress people that are astrology following, smoke inhaling freaking tree lickers. Because there are more people in this country than, more people like that than there are, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, as people like to, or AOCs. I mean, there are a lot of weirdos in this country, and to be truthful, they aren't represented. And you could say that about the most extremists. There are a bunch of, Jew hating Muslims, and there are a bunch of everybody hating Christians, and there are, people that you should find absolutely terrible, but they should be given the opportunity to win election, and they should win election. And when they do win election, it should make you realize, wow, we shouldn't give this organization any power, because people who hate me are in it. It's.
I mean, the thing is that people like. I don't think Congress really does anything anymore. It doesn't really do oversight. It votes on giant appropriations bills where none of them know where it's going, right? Like, we don't even know where all the money's going. Like, nobody thought it through, but they do. They never use it. They never use it to stop a specific thing from happening, no matter how unpopular it is. Because that would be a government shutdown, right? So, I mean, if they can't really use the power of the purse, because like fundamentally they're not, it's just all on autopilot, and they don't write policy because the administrative state writes policy, and they don't really do real oversight because the committees that do oversight really just, they send a subpoena and they could just get laughed at. Like, what are they doing in Congress?
It's grandstanding.
You know,
Yep.
what are they actually doing there? So yeah,
Giving
Yeah.
you the illusion of democracy
yeah.
Mm.
and representation.
So yeah, I mean, it's depressing. I don't know how to fix that, but
Sure.
one thing I think we actually should have is term limits for everybody. Term limits for government bureaucrats, term limits for staffers, term limits for congressmen, term limits for everyone.
That might be good. My recommendation, oh, it's not term limits. It's I would rather go back to 100% spoil system.
What's that?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, at least you had a
Patronage.
reason to win either
Mhm.
party. I
Yep.
mean, now like, they don't really care if they win or not because I mean, like, you would win and then you would get to put your people in jobs.
Yep.
So, it wasn't like this thing where the Republicans didn't care about winning really
Mhm. Yeah.
because if you didn't win, you didn't get the jobs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
Obviously, it has its own problems, but we
Yeah, it
didn't
did. It had a lot of corruption involved in it. But
we
on the other
didn't
hand,
prove
it had a lot more
anything.
turnover of these things. Like if people were
Right.
doing a bad job, you could get rid of them and bring in someone else.
Right. And it's, I mean, the other thing I always cared about immigration. I didn't really understand the permanent state very well until the Trump era. And that was when I was like, oh, wow. I didn't really get how it worked.
Mm.
And, Trump really unmasked it.
Hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I love him. Trump just allows everyone to show their worst self.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I think, he was the great unmasker and they reacted in fear and they made us all put masks on because they were so upset at being unmasked.
Right.
You know?
Mhm.
Like it's this weird thing that like that was what they did. Like he exposed them so much in a way they'd never been exposed before and they couldn't handle it.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah, I tend to agree. So, when it comes to your experience in DC, do you have any fun or crazy stories since living there?
I mean it's a nice place to live.
Mhm. Oh, just
Like
interactions you have with other policymakers or anything like that, or has anybody given you any real doozy takes?
I
I
mean,
know that sounds full of people with
people do. I don't. I mean, and nobody reveals themselves in front of me. I'm like too honest, but like
oh, really.
it is what I am really aware of because I live here is is how out of touch the political class is. They really at like a profound level. Like I went to some happy hour and I don't go to as many as I used to, but there was this guy who was like, yeah, people we just have to get rid of what was his name? George Santos. Oh, he's so unbearable. And I'm like, the people don't care about George Santos. They are not like the Republicans out there do not want the Republican Party to limit their majority even more because George Santos is a clown. They think you're all clowns because you are all clowns.
Right.
He's just more obvious. And he's like, well, I'm a GOP operative and I really get how it works. I'm like, I wouldn't brag about being a GOP operative. That's like saying, like, I know how to lose.
Yeah. Have you ever read Mark Lebovich's book This Town?
No, maybe I
Yeah,
should.
you should find a copy. It's all about like it's during the Obama era, and basically it's describing DC life. It's very humorous, but on the other hand, I read it and I'm like, this is unbelievable corruption. Did you know that when Hillary Clinton signed her book deal, her agent was her agent and the company's agent that she was signing it with?
Yeah, I mean,
Like stuff like that. It's just and it slags both sides, but it was just like one, I can't remember who it was, but one of the GOP guys was forced to fire his staffer, and then 3 months later he's back on staff
yeah,
after a
no, I
scandal,
mean,
stuff like that.
there's so many mechanisms to prevent any accountability. I mean, it's
Mm.
just crazy. And it's funny. It's like I always wondered, why people paid like so much money for bad art, and then it suddenly occurred, like, what if it's all just like money laundering? You
That's the
know,
entire his existence for art since the beginning.
right? And suddenly I was like, that makes so much more sense now, because people are like, oh, modern art, isn't it funny how people will pay millions of dollars for something that, like, that's ridiculous, like a banana taped on a wall or something, and I'm not saying that one is, but like, I was like, oh, money laundering does kind of like explain it all, doesn't it?
Yeah. The entire Renaissance was nothing but money laundering.
Right. And it's, book deals, art deals. So it's just, well, in the Renaissance, they had nice art. So
they had good art, but
well, I think there was a level of status during the Renaissance. I mean, there was you had at a time of kings and family aristocracies going on. Status symbols like that were I think highly sought after. Unlike today, where it is still sought after, but you could, if you're in that community, the difference between something that's sought after and something that, like you said, is an obvious money laundering operation. Oh goodness, I had a follow up to this. I blanked. David, save me.
Okay, well, speaking of that, there's on the same topic. We had this situation where Paul probably has never watched the show. Murphy Brown has an episode where her 2-year-old son makes a painting, and she bets some art critics that they would not be able to tell which one is her son's thing. And at the end of the episode, her son's artwork is being carted off by some guys like paying $5,000 for it. And she's like, I got to tell you, this is my son's 2-year-old drawing. And he turns to her like, you have two of the top art critics in the world arguing over this, how good this painting is. Like, I'm buying it. And she's like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, maybe it doesn't really work.
Oh, I'm losing Julie.
No.
Fed's
got her.
Yep, the Fed's got her. Yeah. Another thing is basically, we were talking about what the origins of the Renaissance are actually because the Black Death created a labor shortage, and that with immigration, illegal immigration is basically depressing the wages of everyone. I do recall.
So that's something that I really kind of sometimes try to wrap my head around, because here's the thing about illegal. There's a point in time where if you're not, you can only go so far in America when you don't know English.
Yeah.
You really are limited, because the fact of the matter is a lot of the trainings that are done are also. Oh no, we lost. Oh, we lost.
Okay, we'll give her 5 minutes and then we can chat for a bit.
Okay. No, the thing is, when you don't know English, a lot of your instruction manuals, yeah, they do have English and Spanish, but when you talk about the other immigrants who are coming around, like the East Asians and even the Africans, you can only get so far without, literacy in the United States, and then you don't contribute anything. It doesn't matter how cheap you're willing to work. If people can't communicate you and you are illiterate to being trained, you quite literally cannot do any sort of contribution, and there's 10,000 people just like you.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I've never, that's one of the things where I have to ask, like, there is a break point with the doing the jobs other people don't want to do, because those jobs do fill up eventually. And then what are you doing? You can't escalate because you probably need to know the language. And at that point in time, if you have that kind of skill set, you maybe didn't need to even come to the US in the first place. This might have been unnecessary. So it's just, there is a break point.
Sorry about that. My laptop ran out of batteries.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for the quick comeback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just forgot to plug it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious about this, Julie. The people that you say that are really detached in DC from the general public, what's typically like the background? Like how do folks find themselves in the DC bubble?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends. It's like it's because there's a lot of people who are like me who came because they don't like what's happening, right? And they care about policy and they work for nonprofits. Then there's people who, who are just lobbyists, right? And they're connected to big money and they have, they have the ins to buy stuff. And then there's, there's government workers, but it's just it's a bubble because they don't, they don't get affected by the economy the way the rest of the country does. They don't, and they don't. I mean, it's weird because in some ways there's a huge diversity of opinion here, but in some ways there really isn't.
Okay, so everybody's debating about what the good days should be like, but nobody ever has to debate on what the bad days are like because they never experience them.
I mean, not in the same way because like I don't, I mean, there's always jobs in government. There's always jobs in lobbying. There's always jobs, like I don't know if they know what it's like when a whole town is disrupted because a plant closes. I don't know if they I don't know if they see
Appreciate it.
that.
Yeah.
And they also, I mean, they're all in their own bubbles, right? Like so, like staffers on the Hill, like they're really wrapped up in what staffers. That's why it's like they think everyone cares about George Santos. Like that's what's funny. If you talk to Republican staffers on the Hill, you would think that like out in Chicago, like, that's what's on their minds. It's not on their minds, right?
Right.
It's just that, and that's how everyone is, really. It's just that, like, in DC, they make all these decisions that affect other people.
Right.
You know?
There's an inflated sense of self-importance, and certainly, like, they're special because all they do is focus on this while you are distracted with real life. And they're the ones who are selflessly giving all their time to focus on stuff that you're too busy to care about. No, I definitely empathize with that background because I actually shared a lot of that sentiment until I wanted to run for local office and I started block walking, and then the reality hit me. Literally nobody cares about any of the policy stuff. It's immediate needs at this moment. And what I personally grew from that is an admiration. It's like, oh, you found something other than politics to put your mind on.
Right.
And it's whereas traditionally in these groups, it's sort of seen with disgust, like, how can you like be thinking about anything else but the environment or George Santos or insert, their bubble problem. But then you think you sort of accept the reality. Well, they got their own life, and it's actually a good thing when the general public isn't up to date with politics because that means they're living their life.
I mean, it's not necessarily a good thing because if they paid attention to what was happening, less bad things wouldn't happen as much. It's just that it is a rational thing. Like it's really rational that when they know they have so little power over it, that they don't pay that much attention. But like they get away with it in DC because people aren't paying attention. When they really do focus in on something, like something happens. So it's like I don't really blame people for not focusing on politics because like I can understand they have nothing that would make them focus when they have their own lives to worry about. But like politics is affecting them.
Right.
And so, you can't just say like, I'm just going to live my life. Like we all do have to do our part,
Right. Well, it's just, I was more speaking just to the general public, it's just how detached they are. And then how staffers tend to be extremely immersed to a fault.
Yeah.
With everything that's going on, like to the point where you have nothing in common with the average person because no person is this immersed in policy.
Well, right. Yeah, exactly. And they don't like they get really easily swayed by the media saying like you won't be forgiven for doing this, like you have to pass gun control. People will be mad, and like I'm like forget these polls, like people are going to absorb it in a second, like don't do something bad because you're freaked out about something, like
Right.
it's
and
ephemeral.
and when you're dealing with people who have, I'm going to be brutally honest, no discernible skills whatsoever, that describes like 99% of staffers in my experience. If they got fired from their jobs, they literally could not do anything else. And when you have these sorts of individuals, perception is everything, because if they aren't perceived as being more than they're quite literally nothing.
Well, yeah, and I think like it's interesting because like I was thinking about this week with these people who really thought Trump wasn't going to win Iowa, really seemed to think Trump wasn't going to win New Hampshire. And I'm like, what do you think? You can just will it into being? Like,
yes,
I mean,
yes,
like,
they do. They actually do think that.
Like, I'm like, he's gonna win Iowa and he's gonna win New Hampshire.
He didn't. I mean, he more than won. He won more than one Iowa. He broke a record. He won so hard. Like,
yeah. Like, and I'm like, you don't like. I think there's been a disconnect between Trump and like actually people like I agree with and who are wonky like me and who do want the best for this country, like people I know, because I think that like, but Trump doesn't appeal to me. And I'm like, yeah, but you're weird. You're like a weird, wonky person. I'm weird. A person isn't gonna like catch on fire and lead a movement because he appeals to people like me.
Yeah.
He has to appeal to like the people out there. Right. So, I think there is just this disconnect too with like a lot of like genuinely people who really are in it for the right reasons, because they can't see what it's like to be someone who doesn't think about this stuff.
Right. Exactly.
And I just wish that like everyone who wanted the best for this country would get on board and like make the most of it. We can't stand infighting.
Well, and that's, I mean, this is something that I've just come to realize is true. Is the people who do want the best for this country are often the ones signing paychecks, not, signing policy. It's, I mean, the thing, then that's where I do believe, when people are like, oh, like we need younger representation. I'm like, no, if you're young and you've got energy, you should be running a business that like contributes something very good to the society and doing your best to hire people and, help build livelihoods and build communities that way. You don't need to pass a government spending bill to do exactly that. In fact, it's more efficient if you do it this way anyway. Yeah. And that was just, in fact, it took me doing accounting to realize this, because then I was actually able to do the math after doing a policy background and accounting background to realize, oh, this isn't like one way is better than the other. This is the like best way to do it. And the other one is just, it's almost counterproductive in the way that it just doesn't create like value to society as a whole. And again, like you said, or like we were saying, it's this circular self-indulgence of what people really think about. It's, or they split the pie. I think that's the way to do it. Because I feel like when you're in the private sector, it's not zero sum. There is a growth mentality. Whereas in DC, we got to figure out how to spend these tax dollars as much as possible, and then we'll deficit if we want to.
I mean, and there's a ton of people in DC that, the way they think about people is, what can you do for me? What can you get me? How can I climb the ladder? And, I don't think that way. Like, I like to help other people who care about the movement too. Like, you know what? Like, I'm here to connect all the people who should be connected. that's the way to get something done. And ultimately they're going to remember me, you know, be nice to the people on the way up, be nice to the people on the way down. Like, I don't, there's too many people who believe in like only being nice to the people they think they can help them.
Right.
Like, you
Right.
don't, it's just not, it's not even the right mentality. Like, ultimately, the people you help are going to help you. I mean, that's not why you do it, but like that's the mentality you should have, right? The growth mentality. The like, oh, how do I help you get where you're going?
Correct.
Well, I think that's
Yeah.
we're coming up to an hour and a half discussion here, and I think that's
Yeah.
a good way to kind of end it, is having that kind of positive outlook instead of some of the negative things we talked about tonight. What do you think, Paul?
I tend to agree completely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who do want to fix it, and I just hope that we're gonna get through this year, and we're like the best of us are gonna win.
Mm-hmm. We can all hope. Julie, do you want to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit more about your organization? How can people reach out if they want to help or contribute? Can you kind of give any folks watching a pathway to contribute or help in any way possible?
Oh, well, I mean, so first of all, just a disclaimer, I do our litigation, and the personal opinions are just my personal opinions. I'm not speaking on behalf of CIS, but
Sure.
yeah, but it just, if you want to learn about immigration, so it's Center for Immigration Studies, CIS.org, so CIS.org. And I mean, if you do want to help us, like, there's a donate button on our site. You can also, sign up for our email list. We email out what we do. And, we are a great source of information about what's going on in immigration and the big picture of it. So we have people on the border. We have people, we have people who look into our refugee stuff. Like, there's a lot of things that we spend time like digging out that like nobody else even knows about. So our mission is to inform the public and to inform Congress and to inform policymakers. And so, yeah, I mean, I would just say, anybody who wants to know, just look at our website. And again, everything I've said, what I do is not our policy. I do our litigation. So I do our FOIA litigation, and I'm suing over the fact that they ignore all the environmental impacts of immigration. Again, and that's actually against the law. So we have laws in this country that say that if the government does something that affects the environment, they're supposed to think about what the environmental effect is. And when it comes to immigration, they do nothing. So you have to do a NEPA analysis to graze 100 cows, but you don't have to do a NEPA analysis if you let in 10 million people. So, and this is wrong.
That's an excellent angle. Really good identification of a double standard.
So yeah, so that's one of the things I do, and I also do. So basically, I sue for information because fundamentally, our environmental laws are meant to provide information to the public. If you think of it that way, it's to provide informed consent. I mean, the truth is they don't necessarily need your consent, but they do need to inform you. So this law was passed in 1970. It's called the National Environmental Policy Act. It basically said agencies have to do an environmental analysis of the things they do, and they stressed population growth. So that's what I work on personally, and anything I say about policy is just my opinion.
Sure. No, and that's why we wanted you here. Just no, I mean your story is interesting. Your work is interesting, and we're glad that we had you here today to say everything that you're working on, Julie. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's very interesting to talk to you, and I've been getting to know you in book club, and is there anything? Can you tell me just what what the podcast is about and where?
It's just a show where I've been during COVID, I started the show with a couple other co-hosts, and went through them, and then I went back and I did 75 interviews and panels and a bunch of other stuff, and then I went back to work full time and just didn't have the same energy. And my last co-host was in Guam, so it was a really tough coordinating. And then
Yeah.
I met Paul at Book Club, and I said, are you interested in restarting up the podcast with me? And he said yes. And so
I was drafted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I would like to do more, more talking, but I do litigating. So
for sure.
Yep.
Would there be any circumstances that you would, or would there be any highlight issues that if were to come up in the media, you would want to come back on and discuss them? Or is there any issues that you're particularly passionate on that maybe we could do a short segment with you in the future if it were to come up that you would love to talk about?
I mean, sure. I mean, I do follow the immigration news because I have to, but I guess, legal stuff most is my job. If you wanted to have, I don't know, we could talk offline about if you wanted to ask, one of my colleagues to come too.
Oh yeah.
That'd be amazing.
We could do a panel or something too.
Yeah, that's what I was recommending, because that's, to me, that's current and frankly exclusive insight that people love to hear, because frankly the talking heads can only tell us so much.
Well, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about this era, is that you can actually learn from people who really know what they're talking about. I mean, that's what's been so amazing about being able to leave behind the corporate media.
Yes.
You have to do a lot more work to figure it out, but you can find people who know what they're talking about, which is great. But I guess you just have to be, discerning, and you have to be interested, I guess.
Right.
So.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the audience for joining us. We're ending the show with 3 current viewers, and we had some commentary in the thing. So, welcome, and we'll see you in the future.
Yeah, I'll see you later. Bye.
Have a good week, everyone.
Yeah.
You too.